From the virtual stage of the 92nd Street Y, welcome to the latest installment of our civic series, Race to City Hall. I'm Seth Pinsky, the CEO of the 92nd Street Y, and I'm honored to be here to host compelling, substantive conversations with leading candidates for some of New York City's most important elected offices, moderated by political journalists from our media partner, City and State New York. In a few moments, we'll hear from the candidates for Manhattan Borough President, who will take questions and share their visions for the future of our city. Thank you to all of them for being here. As most of you likely are aware, the borough presidents are key players in New York City government. Among other responsibilities, they act as champions for and advocates of the people of their boroughs, and they're involved at a critical point in the land use process that helps develop what gets built where and by whom. While the role of Manhattan Borough President is always an important one, it is particularly important now. That's because unquestionably, we're going through one of the most difficult periods in Manhattan's history, a period during which we are simultaneously seeking to confront longstanding injustices, ensure the health and safety of our fellow New Yorkers, and revive an economy that has been decimated across nearly all sectors. This is especially true for the arts, cultural, and educational sector, the sector of which we at the 92nd Street Y are a part. We're therefore eager to hear from the candidates to gain a better understanding of who they are and what they plan to do to revitalize this incredibly complex place we all call home. And so, without further ado, let's get today's conversation going. To tell us more about the format of this conversation and to introduce our moderator, I'd like to welcome Ralph Ortega, Editor-in-Chief at City and State, New York. Ralph?
Thank you, Seth. Welcome, candidates, to the 92nd Street Y, and hello to all the viewers watching online to our Manhattan Borough President's Election Forum. I'm Ralph Ortega, Editor-in-Chief at City and State, and I'm honored to be here today to help kick off our candidates forum. Before we explain the rules of the forum and introduce our moderators, on behalf of City and State New York, I want to take a moment to thank our partner, the 92nd Street Y, for your collaboration on this series. First, I will explain the format, which all the candidates have agreed to in advance of today's event. The forum will have three parts consisting of opening statements, followed by a series of policy questions, and finally, each candidate will have a chance to deliver a closing statement. Our moderator will remind our candidates how much time each one has to respond and when their time has elapsed. Today's moderator is City and State New York's Rebecca Lewis. Rebecca is our deputy state politics reporter, where she covers a variety of issues, from the legalization of recreational marijuana to the charter revision commissions to putting together the daily First Read newsletter. Before coming to City and State, Rebecca worked at the public radio station WFUV while attending Fordham University. We're lucky to have her here to guide the conversation. Rebecca designed the questions to put forth today and incorporated themes submitted by 92nd Street Y patrons in advance of the event. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to all the candidates answering our questions. We hope you enjoy this presentation. Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you, Ralph, the candidates, and to Seth Pinsky and the 92nd Street Y for your partnership. Before we hear more from the candidates themselves, I want to take a moment to introduce who is with us here today. Attending today's forum is former Deputy Secretary of Economic Development and Housing for the state of New York, Lindsey Boylan, former Community Board 7 Chair, Elizabeth Caputo, State Senator Brad Holyman, City Council Member Ben Kallos, and City Council Member Mark Levine. I will be keeping time during today's forum and will alert the candidates how much time they have to answer, and will give them 10-second visual warnings on my screen. I will then say out loud when your time has expired. We will have an opening remarks segment that will be every candidate will have 1 minute. When we move into the Q&A, I will pose the question. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond, and there will be some time as well for follow-up for individual candidates or the group. The first part of our forum, as I said, is opening statements. As I said, 1 minute each will be given. Each candidate will give a brief intro, tell us about who they are and their vision for New York City. The order of the opening statements were selected at random. There will go Council Member Mark Levine, Council Member Ben Kallos, Senator Brad Holyman, Elizabeth Caputo, and Lindsay Boylan. Councilmember Levine, go ahead. You have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, Ralph, and Seth. Thank you, City and State. Thank you to the 92nd Street Y, which is a cultural treasure for our borough and our city. And it's great to see my colleagues. I'm Mark Levine. I'm running to be the next Manhattan Borough President to fight for our recovery from COVID, from the health crisis, from the economic shock, from the profound inequality that has been revealed and exacerbated over the past year. I've been fighting on behalf of this city my entire adult life, since I graduated from college with a physics degree and became a bilingual math and science teacher in District 7 in the South Bronx. I went on to found a community development credit union in Washington Heights, which has helped thousands of families and small businesses get access to capital. I've been in the city council now for 7 years, representing West Harlem and parts of the Upper West Side in Washington Heights, where I live with my family. I passed historic legislation granting a right to counsel to protect tenants from eviction in housing court. As chair of the City Council's Health Committee, I put my heart and soul into fighting this pandemic, standing up for science and equity. I'm running now for borough president to help make this a healthier, safer, and more just Manhattan for all of us. For those of you who are watching, I hope you'll consider supporting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Levine. Councilmember Kallos, you're up next. You have 1 minute for your opening statement.
I'm Councilmember Ben Kallos. I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because everywhere else in America, people struggle to get out. But here in New York City, we're struggling to stay. And I believe together we can fix that. I grew up in Manhattan with a single mom, sharing a 1-bedroom. And as a student at Bronx Science, I was so ashamed to be on the reduced lunch line that I didn't eat. That's why as a council member, I want free lunch for every student and why I want to feed every child 3 square meals a day. As a lifelong tenant, this city, I believe this city is so unaffordable because real estate developers get whatever they want from the politicians who take their money. I never have, never will, and I'll require affordable housing as part of every new development. I grew up at the 92Y going to Camp Yomi. I was inaugurated at the 92Y, and I've been going there to teach my daughter to swim during family swim. I've been proud to secure millions for the 92Y and as a Jewish person to stand up to anti-Semitism in this community and all over New York City. Together, I believe we can win a Manhattan where no student goes hungry, where nobody gets forced out of their homes, and free of anti-Semitism. A Manhattan for all of us.
Thank you, Councilmember Kallos. Senator Hoyleman, you're up next. You have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Thanks so much. It's great to see City and State here, and thank you, 92nd Street Y. We finally made it to the stage of the 92nd Street Y, and it's virtual. I'm State Senator Brad Holyman. Happy Pride, everyone. I'm running to be New York City's first gay borough president. I live in the Village with my husband and 2 young daughters. I've served in the Senate for the last 9 years and passed some of the most progressive legislation in decades, including making sure that our children get their vaccines to stay healthy, protecting tenants, including seniors, from eviction during COVID-19, fighting the scourge of dangerous guns on our streets and hate crimes, and fighting for reproductive health. Right now, I'm leading the charge to disbar Rudy Giuliani for his shameful involvement in the Capitol insurrection. I'm proud to say I've been endorsed by Congressman Jerry Nadler and 2 borough presidents, including Steve Virginia Fields and Ruth Messenger, as well as New York City's public school teachers. I'm really running on my record as a champion of progressive reform and would be honored to earn your vote.
Thank you, Senator Hoyleman. Next up, we have Ms. Caputo. You have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Thank you so much to City and State, the 92nd Street Y, Ralph, Seth, Rebecca. My name is Elizabeth Caputo, and I'd like to start by explaining what the borough president job is not. Borough president is not a legislator. It's not an administrator. It's not a stepping stone to a long political career. The borough president's job is to connect and empower the people of Manhattan to make our lives better. It's a job of building bridges and getting things done. And that's what I do. Over the last 25 years, throughout a lot of jobs, apartments, and relationships, Manhattan has been my one constant. It's always given me hope. It's been devastating to see so many stores boarded up. We need to bring Manhattan back block by block and shop by shop. I have been a 3-term elected community board chair. I ran DL21C for a decade, where I got to know many of you. And I work with people around the world at the World Economic Forum, where I work to make our cities safer, cleaner, greener, and more equitable for everyone. That's what I'm going to do as your borough president. Thank you, and I look forward to speaking with you later today.
Thank you, Ms. Caputo. And finally, we have Ms. Boylan. You have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, especially to City and State, Rebecca, and also the 92nd Street Y, which has two of my great fandoms in one, Nora Ephron, maybe the most video content, and New York's history and New York's future. I came to New York City with $100 in my pocket after graduating from Wellesley, moved 9 times in 10 years, including one apartment on a 6th-floor walk-up above 4 washers on the Upper East Side, which was incredible. And I came here because I wanted to be in the field of urban planning. I've become a career urban planner, a progressive Democrat, led the state's economic development and job creation, and most importantly, I'm a mom to a 7-year-old daughter. I started my career in New York, managing public spaces, including the revival of Bryant Park, the pedestrianization of major parts of Broadway, and then I went into municipal finance and ultimately worked for the state, as mentioned, as Secretary for Economic Development. My career has been all about making life better for New Yorkers, and this is the most important job at the most pivotal time, and I'm the right person to do it. I'm excited for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boylan. Now that we have finished up with our opening statements, we'll move into the main questions. I have a series of larger policy questions. Each of you will have, as I said, 1 minute to respond. And time permitting, there will be some follow-ups for individual candidates or some time at the end to discuss a follow-up question thrown out to each of you. We'll see how it goes, and it will be a little bit of a surprise for both of us to see how, time permitting, we will use any extra time we have. The first question that I have for each of you is about arts and culture. Governor Cuomo has recently announced the return of the Tribeca Film Festival, which I'm sure many people are excited about. Radio City returning at 100% capacity for vaccinated folks. Broadway shows are returning in the fall. Museums, capacity limit at museums have been lifted, as have capacity limits in most of the city at this point, but many people likely will remain wary for the time being about returning. My question for you is, what as borough president would you do to help revitalize Manhattan's arts and culture scene and to help struggling artists? For this question, we will begin with Councilmember Kallos.
I love the arts. It's one of those things where sometimes if you struggle with self-expression, it's a place you can express yourself. Fun fact, I actually got into LaGuardia for art, but wasn't confident enough in my abilities, so I went to Bronx Science instead. And we really need to invest in our arts. That's part of why, as a council member, I've invested right here in the 92Y to the tune of millions. Rebecca, you forgot to list the 92Y, which has some of the best programming and is actually a Broadway theater. I can't wait to come back here. I've always been happy to sponsor jazz programs and speaker series that really make 92Y so special. And I can't wait to come back here in person. You can actually see it out my window. That's how close I am and how much I love it. When it comes to the arts, we've been really working on it in our public schools. I actually host a art show at Sotheby's for all the public schools in my district, and I can't wait to bring it borough-wide for every public school student to see their art hanging in a museum and really inspire the arts. And then when it comes to some of the museums in our city, particularly the Jewish Museum, we've got several Jewish museums here, and I've actually been talking to the curators of all of them around trying to create a culture pass to get people to visit all the museums, not just the big ones, not just Natural History and Med, but the Jewish Museum, both
Councilman Kallos, I'm sorry, you've gone a little bit over time, so I'm afraid if we have time, we can revisit, but we have to move on to the next candidate. Ms. Caputo, 1 minute, what would you do to help revitalize Manhattan's arts and culture scene and to help struggling artists?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Look, this is a job that really is going to require a leader who has worked with cities around the world and looked at what one of the key components of our city's economy. Manhattan is the largest central business district arguably in the world, certainly in the United States. When I work every day at the World Economic Forum, I am looking at issues like travel and tourism and transit and how we're going to bring back local economies around the world. And quite frankly, other cities are doing it better than we are. But we are the best because we have Broadway, we have Lincoln Center, we have 92Y, we have arts and culture organizations that we must support. I believe that a link to that is making sure that our transit system is up and functioning, and whoever is borough president is going to have to make sure that we give people a reason to come back. That's going to mean safety. It's going to mean making sure people feel like they can come in, have a hotel to go to, have a subway ride to go to, and for people who live here, a school to go to when they're raising their kids here, where they also want to be able to go to a Broadway show. It really connects all the lifeblood at a neighborhood level. That's what I'm going to do as borough president. And again, I believe very strongly in working with organizations like the Hospitality Alliance, the Nightlife Alliance, organizations that are going to help bring back Manhattan. And in order to, and when we do that, it's going to
Ms. Caputo, I apologize.
Yep.
We have also gone over the 1 minute.
Got it. Thanks. Okay.
Just very briefly as a follow-up, I know that something that you have mentioned specifically is a safety net for arts and gigs workers. I'm just wondering, 30 seconds, if you could just tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure, there needs to be a safety net and direct payments for small businesses and workers. It's just, it has to happen. And again, it comes with the leadership of whoever becomes the borough president being able to actually get it done. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we will go to Ms. Boylan. Same question about revitalizing arts and culture.
Sure. My experience in this is overseeing the state's New York State Council on the Arts, which distributes hundreds of millions of dollars every year to large and small institutions, and also overseeing I Love New York's tourism base. And it's really those two things. We may be the central business district, but we are the cultural heart of this city and of this state. And that is most important for our power in the future and to attract people. So first and foremost, we need to create a livable city, which is what I did in smaller form at Bryant Park and other public spaces. We need to make people feel comfortable in the public spaces. We need to invest in them, which I will do with $100 million worth of capital money. And we also need to focus in on the unique and specific needs of the arts and cultural institutions, large and small. So I will have a one-stop shop for small business, but I will also have a one-stop shop for arts and cultural institutions, because the concerns that they have, the unique needs they have in terms of employment schedules, preparation, and the like are very germane to the industry. And I've talked with folks from Broadway and across the scene, and I'm excited, really excited to do this work with you.
Thank you, Ms. Boylan. Next, I'll throw this to Councilmember Levine. 1 minute. How would you as borough president revitalize Manhattan's arts and culture scene and help struggling artists?
Well, thank you, Rebecca. There is no comeback for Manhattan or New York City without the arts, because we need it for our heart and soul, and because it's an economic engine. And that's why I released an art recovery plan as part of my borough president's campaign. It starts with continuing to fight against this pandemic so it's safe for arts institutions to reopen. As a reminder of how big a challenge that is, there was the production that was shut down nearby at the Park Avenue Armory just a few weeks ago because of COVID cases among the staff. The city also has to help, especially nonprofit arts venues, modernize to improve ventilation, and the city should provide capital for that because this is an airborne pandemic, and there may be future airborne pandemics. We have to expand the budget of the Department of Cultural Affairs, which is right now less than 1/4% of the city's budget. Now, to be comparable to other global cultural capitals, it should be more like 1%. And expanding to that level would help us spread out arts funding to overcome the inequity that has plagued arts funding in New York City, so that we can uplift smaller nonprofits, communities of color, artists of color, content telling the narratives of New Yorkers of color. And we'll be able to do this if we expand the budget of the DCLA, as I've called for in my arts plan.
Thank you, Councilmember Levine. And finally, we'll throw it to Senator Hoyleman. 1 minute, how would you revitalize Manhattan's arts and culture scene?
Well, thank you so much. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues that arts are central. Certainly arts education needs to be reemphasized and brought back to our public schools. That needs to start at an early age. I'm happy to say that in the state budget, I doubled the New York City theatrical and production musical tax credit from 50 million to 100 million on my efforts. But Rebecca, I'm really concerned about arts workers, and we don't want our nonprofit organizations to use the pandemic as an excuse to renegotiate contracts and pay peanuts to our arts workers, to our musicians, to our set designers, to our electricians, to our actors. Unfortunately, that's what institutions, it seems like Lincoln Center, are doing right now. So I'm going to lock arms with organizations, labor unions like A802, to make certain that arts workers get the pay they deserve. They have not been paid anything during this pandemic, and they deserve to come back strong with the arts organizations and get the pay they deserve for being out in the cold for so long. Believe it or not, Lincoln Center has a lockout. It's unacceptable, and we need to join forces with them.
Thank you, Senator Hoyleman. In this question, I think we went a little bit long. We don't have much time for follow-ups, so I apologize this time around. Ms. Caputo, it seems that you were a little bit luckier. I followed up with you once. I will try to be more equitable with follow-ups and a little bit stricter with the 1 minute so that we have more time for follow-ups in our next questions. So for my next question, I'd like to ask about education. Schools will be reopening full time in the fall without a remote option after a year of remote learning that has led to many students falling behind, especially low-income students of color who are from communities the most impacted by the pandemic. What would you do to ensure that education is equitable and that every student, including especially students of color from these hard-hit communities, are able to catch up? This time, we will first go to Ms. Boylan. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I think the most important thing here, the most prescient, is the $600 million of foundation aid that now the state will be paying to our most needy students. This is money that has been held back from our students in the city, and now we will be getting in part because of all the federal aid that's coming in. So thanks to the Alliance for Quality Education and all of the advocates here, we need to make sure that that actually reaches our kids who are in the most need. I'm very glad that schools will be fully open. We need that consistency. We also need to appoint, and I will appoint someone to the Public Education Council who's entirely focused on education inequality and reaching our students. I imagine also spending a fair amount of the $100 million of capital money in our schools that have the most need and need for support, and appointing to the community education councils to do the same.
Thank you, Ms. Boylan. You actually finished a little bit earlier, so I'll just take a little bit of that extra time just to quick follow up in terms of the specialized high school entrance exam. Is that something that you support continuing, or would you support ending as we look to try to desegregate our schools?
I mean, there's no excuse for having a lack of Black and brown students in our specialized schools. We need to admit more students. We need to open up more seats so that more students have access to this education. And I think we need to find ways to not exclude certain communities and bring them in together on whatever the process is moving forward. My preference would be making it, opening up many more seats so that many more students have an access and opportunity to this education, while preparing families for what changes to entrance may look like over time. And let's not forget that this is 2 or 3% of our students in the entire city. And we need to make sure that all of our students are getting access to this equal quality of education, educators, and schools themselves.
Thank you, Ms. Boylan. Next, I'll throw it to Senator Hoyleman. What would you do to make sure that education is equitable and that our students are catching up after a year of remote learning?
Well, I'm proud to say that we did pass $3 billion plus to realize finally the campaign for fiscal equity, which had shortchanged our public schools. I'm a public school parent. I know that one of the things we need is nurses and social workers in our public schools, because students are going to endure trauma. The other thing that I think is important, I'm focused on dyslexia. My 10-year-old is dyslexia. My husband and I didn't find out until she was 9. I want to use the Borough President's resources for universal screening of every kindergartner for dyslexia. It's estimated up to 20% of our public school students are dyslexic, and it's no coincidence that 40% of the men on Rikers right now are dyslexic or have some sort of other reading or learning disability. This is a real cause of action that needs to be activated by parents, teachers. I'm proud to have been endorsed by the UFT, but I think it's an area that has been ignored for far too long in our public school system.
And a quick follow-up to that, say 20 seconds. The school's IEP program has long been considered fairly inequitable. Your wealth or access to wealth has often determined whether or not you have access to an IEP. What would you, as borough president, since you were focused on dyslexia specifically, would you do to try to make that more equitable and make sure that every student who needs access to an IEP has access to one?
Well, an IEP costs at least $5,000 to get a neuropsych. I mean, who can afford that? We need greater access to that type of identification. I think ripping off the Band-Aid and really exposing the reading illiteracy epidemic that exists in our public school system will hopefully motivate the city and the state to fund these neuropsychs to a greater extent. Everyone should have access to one, not just a well-resourced parent.
Thank you, Senator Hoyleman. Next up, I'd like to throw the question to Councilmember Levine. Education after COVID, equitable, and allowing students to catch up.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. This past year has just been brutal on kids, on families, socially and emotionally, but it's also exacerbated educational inequality. And so this fall, we can't just return to a 2019 status quo. We have to account for the damage that's been done. We have to double down on investments in guidance counselors, school psychologists, mental health professionals in our school. We were short pre-pandemic, but now we're just going to have to double down to increase that staff to meet the challenge. We're going to need to expand after school enrichment as well to help close educational gaps. And I do want to say a word on what it means to come back safely in the midst of an ongoing pandemic while acknowledging the great progress we've made. And, I put out a plan on this, which first says that the 3-foot rule should be a goal, but not an absolute requirement, because it would require pushing kids out of some buildings. Next, that if we meet a benchmark on lowering the number of new cases daily, I would say 1 per 100,000, then we can make mask wearing indoors optional for kids. I think we're going to meet that goal this summer. And finally, that we should provide vaccination in every school building so that families and kids who haven't been able to travel to a vaccine site would have it convenient and accessible right there, starting now, over the summer, and as the school year begins.
Thank you, Councilmember Levine. Ms. Caputo, 1 minute on education.
Great. So I'm the product of K through 12 public schools. My mom was actually a kindergarten teacher here in Manhattan at PS 166. I worked to help launch the Fund for Public Schools with Caroline Kennedy almost 2 decades ago. I believe in building back this system. I also believe in standing with our public school parents. I am the only candidate on this stage who has stood with public school parents consistently since November to open the schools when the science and data support it. I did that for 3 reasons. The first was because there were a lot of working families, in particular working women, who lost out over the last year. I care about it also because there were something like 60,000 devices that were gone that the mayor stored somewhere and nobody distributed. And I care for it for the thousands of kids in shelter system who had no access to Wi-Fi. Those are 3 things that we need to really think about. We have until September to reopen the schools. We need to do it responsibly, and whoever's elected needs to take charge with that process. And I would ask those elected officials who are on stage currently right now, I know they're all going to prioritize it, and I'm looking forward to making sure they do. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Caputo. And finally, Councilmember Kallos, you have 1 minute. How would you make sure that education is equitable and that students are able to catch up after a year of COVID?
Grew up with a single mom sharing a one-bedroom, and as a student at Bronx Science, I was so ashamed to stand on the reduced lunch line that I didn't eat. And tell you it's hard to learn when you're hungry. And that's why in the city council, I won free lunch, and why I proposed legislation to guarantee universal after school, and with it, dinner, which would offer every child 3 square meals a day and end youth hunger. Using capital funds from my office, we bought laptops for every school in my district, including schools that didn't have any kids from the neighborhood in them. And when this pandemic started, every single one of them went home with a laptop, not an overpriced iPad. I've since introduced legislation with Public Advocate Jumaane Williams and Borough President Gail Brewer that would guarantee every student who needs one a laptop with internet. And if I can't get it passed by day one, I will pass it. I will buy a laptop for every kid in Manhattan. As Borough President, we can desegregate online classes, an idea that the New York Post endorsed for me. We can use the census to finally desegregate our school districts. And last but not least, we can end the schools to prisons pipeline with universal youth jobs legislation I've introduced with Congressmember Richie Torres to create a schools to jobs pipeline.
Very quickly to clarify, Councilmember Kallos, as Borough President, you would advocate for the legislation that you have introduced if it hasn't passed by the end of this year.
That is incorrect. As Borough President, I would do what I've been doing as council member. I would actually buy every single kid a laptop in Manhattan who needed one.
Okay, thank you. For our next question, I want to ask about the Borough President's bully pulpit. The Borough Presidents have not as much power as they used to have under the city charter, but they have a very powerful bully pulpit that can be utilized differently depending on who is in the position. We've seen it used in very different ways depending on who the person is. Especially since many of you are coming from a place as a legislator where you were able to actively introduce and pass laws and legislation, I want to ask each of you how you would use your bully pulpit and what issue or issues you would most focus on, that while you may not have the ability to pass legislation or directly get something done, that you can advocate for it in your position strongly. I'd like to start with, and this time we're starting with Councilmember Levine. What would you focus your bully pulpit on? What is your biggest issue?
Well, as you've mentioned, this office does have significant powers in land use and legislation and budget and appointments. And yes, in the bully pulpit, it all adds up to a really powerful platform for organizing. And I've led in the city council, not because as one member out of 51, I have absolute power. I passed historic legislation establishing right to counsel for tenants facing eviction because I led a 3-year organizing campaign. And we mobilized media and organized labor and faith leaders and so much more. And we won. And this is how I'll lead as borough president: on behalf of vulnerable tenants, on behalf of arts, on behalf of climate resiliency, on behalf of a renaissance in public space and park space. But in the few seconds left, I do want to say how much I will focus on saving small business, which is facing really an existential threat now. We've lost thousands of precious businesses throughout the borough. Many more are hanging on by a thread. The city has to be a partner, not an obstacle. And so that means I will push for a reconsideration of fines and fees so that the goal of inspections is only to protect health and safety, not to generate revenue for the city. I will fight to increase access to capital so that small businesses can have a place to borrow when they're ready to grow and expand and invest again. And I will fight to expand access to free legal services for low-income immigrant entrepreneurs that are locked in disputes with their landlords, and so much more. Small businesses are the heart and soul.
Thank you, Councilmember Levine. You have gone over.
You got it. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to throw this to Ms. Boylan. What issue or issues do you plan to most focus on and use your bully pulpit, particularly issues that you, as borough president, may not be able to directly influence aside from advocacy?
Sure. So anyone who knows me or knows of me knows that I am not afraid to speak truth to power. And I think that's in many ways what The bully pulpit is all about, for Manhattan Borough President to convince the mayor, to convince the governor, to push other electeds to do the right things. Here are the three areas for me. Issues of livability. We have a city that people fear. Sanitation is declining. All the elements that make you feel safe and comfortable and public safety are declining. And that's exactly the kind of stuff I worked on when I managed Bryant Park and public spaces. The climate crisis. It seems this is the existential crisis, but we never focus on it. And yet it's coming to meet us. I oversaw the state's recovery work in Hurricane Sandy and in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. We need to make our waterfront more resilient and deal with equity that's created by that, all the equity issues of who gets what and how to make it more fair. And then finally, housing. I can't affect it alone, but the way we do affordable housing just doesn't work. We have not developed a system that doesn't displace people. And instead, we just keep building luxury housing that we don't need. So those are the three areas: livability, climate, and housing.
Thank you, Ms. Boylan. And we'll certainly be revisiting affordability before this panel is over. Ms. Caputo, you're up next. What would you focus on and use your bully pulpit to advocate for as borough president?
Sure. So three things to answer your question. Safety, public safety, making things greener, and transit and transportation, and making transportation equitable for all. Just a quick word about each of them. Obviously, we all know the city's seen a rise in crime in recent months, with fewer people in the commercial district, transit ridership at historic lows, employees just now starting to return to work in person. Manhattan feels pretty vulnerable right now, and we need to make sure we're thinking about creative policing and public safety delivery. So that's one thing. Second thing is greener. I have worked as a community board chair to make dirty fuels, get them out of our neighborhood here on the Upper West Side. I have a coastal resilience plan for Manhattan. Congestion pricing needs to be implemented. And we need to think about electrification of cars and reducing the number of vehicles who are going on our streets. So that dovetails into my third point, which is on transportation. We need to think through more equitable ways of people getting around Manhattan. We're going to have, as I mentioned, congestion pricing coming in to the city below 60th Street, and it's going to come in sooner rather than later. And we need to make sure whoever one of us gets elected is an expert in that and knows how to do it responsibly. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Caputo. Quickly, 10 seconds, since you mentioned transportation, busways, yay or nay?
Yay.
Okay, we'll probably revisit that as well. Obviously, there was some controversy, especially around the 14th Street busway. Not everyone was on the same page.
Happy to discuss that.
Next up, Councilmember Kallos. How would you best utilize your bully pulpit, and what issues would you most focus on?
Been a tenant all my life, and I've spent most of this pandemic in a market rate 1-bedroom rental with my wife and daughter that just wasn't designed for stay at home. This city is so unaffordable because real estate developers get whatever they want from politicians who take their money. I never have, I never will. And I'm going to use the land use powers to give every community board an urban planner and continue to support their fights against overdevelopment to win affordable housing, and recently passed a near unanimous resolution to support a homeless shelter on the Upper East Side. I think you underestimate the powers of the borough president. I worked with Gail Brewer to win outdoor dining at the beginning of this pandemic, and then co-sponsored the legislation to make it permanent. We've worked with Gail Brewer to reopen our senior centers, and legislatively, Gail Brewer and I introduced legislation to put youth on community boards. She was a co-sponsor of my legislation to put 50,000 units of affordable housing back on the market. And she actually authored the Charter Revision Commission, which I participated in, and I helped rewrite the job to make the borough president have an independent budget, so that I, as borough president, can stand up to council members who would upzone their districts to raise money for real estate developers for campaign cash. You're going to see a new borough presidency like you've never seen before.
Thank you, Councilmember Kallos. And finally, oh my God, this is the second time I've done it. Senator Hoyleman, I apologize. Senator Hoyleman, 1 minute. How would you best utilize the bully pulpit that comes with being borough president?
Thanks so much. Yes, well, we have a humanitarian crisis and homelessness. 55,000 people a third of those children, 2,500 people sleeping on the streets or more every night. It's unacceptable. We need to focus like a laser on affordable housing. There are 20 million square feet of empty office space in Midtown. We could build supportive and affordable housing there if that's rezoned appropriately with community boards. I want to fight the taxpayer giveaway of $1.3 billion to build 20 million square feet of commercial office space in and around Penn Station. That's 2 million more square feet than we have at Hudson Yards. The last thing we need is more office space right now. And then third, we need to bring the technology and the jobs downtown, uptown. Why is it easier for a young man to get a gun than a job? Well, when we have multi-billion-dollar companies in this city who should be providing summer youth opportunities, the borough president's role is a perfect place to create those corporate partnerships, whether it's the NBA or Google or companies on Wall Street. We should be giving more opportunities to our youth. And as borough president, I'm committed to that.
And very quick follow-up, Senator Hoyleman, 20 seconds. You are obviously still a sitting state senator. There are no term limits. What made you decide to run for borough president and, give up the legislative power that you have as a state senator?
Well, the work is so necessary in the city, given the COVID-19 crisis, given the fact that we've been rudderless in City Hall for so many years. And somebody has to follow Gail Brewer and fill those flats and be an extraordinary leader. So I'm up to the challenge, and I hope voters agree.
Just, do you feel like you're giving up any power from being a legislator to being a borough president?
What's great about the borough president is it's independent. I don't report to a clubhouse, a boss. I report to the voters. I don't have to go through a legislative chamber or
Okay,
a committee.
Thank you, Senator. I think that's enough. Just wanted to get just want to address that as you are still a sitting senator. You're not term limited, running for a position that on paper, at least.
Well, here's the thing. I don't need the job. So there's that too.
Okay, next question. Let's move on. As Councilmember Levine did mention, extraordinary power with land use. One of the main purposes of the borough president is weighing in on land use issues. Obviously, we've all seen the influence that Gail Brewer has had in successfully pushing through projects and also fighting against projects that she has opposed. For each of you as borough president, how would you approach land use, especially when it comes to the creation of badly needed affordable housing, while balancing the needs of the city and the borough against what is often very vocal voices of people who don't want to see greater development in an already very developed borough? We will first go to Ms. Caputo. You have 1 minute.
Thanks. Look, I dealt with that every day, day and night. I'm still a member of Community Board 7. I chaired it for 3 years. I spent days and nights working with both developers and representatives of those developers, as well as, most importantly, members of the community. My biggest issue from a community board perspective, and I want to bring this down to what the borough president actually can do, is reforming the ULURP process. We need to make sure that there is an early warning trigger and that our community input is most highly valued when this process starts. I saw it far too often, whether it was on Riverside South, Jewish Home and Life Care, 200 Amsterdam, major development projects that had little to no community input because it was already a fait accompli. We need to make sure that whoever gets elected to this job is going to work collaboratively with everyone and build those bridges. That happens on a neighborhood level only. So whether it's Olive Freud or Arlene Simon or other people who were advocates, or whether it's people who are in the development community, we need to make sure we are working with them. We are a city that can no longer build out. So we need to think how we build to ensure enough affordable housing and make sure things are equitable for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caputo. Very quick follow-up, and because I know that this is something I'm sure Councilmember Kallos will mention, you said that we have to build up, not out. Are you in favor of any kind of building caps, height caps for buildings as we are building up?
We do need to have height caps, but we also need to realize that we're a city that cannot build out anymore. And if we want people to live in Manhattan, we need to think about how to do it responsibly. And I don't think by having purity tests is going to solve any problem.
Thank you, Ms. Caputo. Councilmember Kallos, you are up next. How would you address land use and especially the creation of affordable housing in Manhattan?
Been a tenant all my life, and my wife and I were forced from a market rate rental during a high-risk pregnancy when the landlord spiked our rent, and that's just no way to live. Our city is so unaffordable because real estate developers get whatever they want from elected officials who take their money. I never have, I never will. I've used that independence to work with Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer to do the first of its kind community-led rezoning to stop Billionaires Row from expanding to the Upper East Side. Then we used that momentum to organize the entire borough to stop buildings for billionaires with empty spaces. And doing so, we've been able to protect rent-regulated tenants like Herndon Worth and Charles Fernandez living on 58th Street. Working with the Borough President Gail Brewer, we wrote the law to force real estate developers who get billions in tax breaks to put more than 50,000 units back on the market. You can find nearly 1,000 right now at housingconnect.nyc.gov. And on the issue of affordable housing, I've proposed for the Upper East Side, where the mayor has failed to do any affordable housing. We've done 1,000 units with the governor, believe it or not, requiring any building over 200 feet tall to include affordable housing on site and replace the rent regulated affordable housing it would be displacing.
So would you continue to fight for that borough-wide as borough president?
It is core to my campaign. I want to see every single new building include affordable housing that not only replaces what might be lost, but also adds.
Thank you, Councilmember Kallos. Ms. Boylan, land use and affordability, how would you approach it as borough president?
Sure. Well, and becoming the Secretary for Economic Development and Housing was one of the great benefits of my career because I got to finally oversee the housing portfolio for the state, and in which case I negotiated hundreds of millions of dollars for underfunded NYCHA. On one hand, we need to reinforce the things that we already have in the existing environment for affordability. So the City Council has made some strides in having section vouchers, having housing vouchers cover market rate housing. We need to push the state to do the same. Otherwise, you have inequality in terms of what people can do. And we need to get more robust fair housing legislation passed, even if it need be at the city level, to make it illegal to discriminate based on source of income, which is always usually a way to discriminate based on race and gender and many other things. We need to help and support more supportive housing and more senior housing. And from a land use perspective, the zoning process just gets us more luxury. We don't need to warehouse more luxury housing. We need a totally different approach that actually gets more than mandatory inclusionary housing, small amounts of affordability that aren't affordable. We need to totally remake that system.
20 seconds. What would be your proposal to remake MIH?
I wouldn't try to incentivize luxury developments that include, somewhere between, a few hundred affordable for a certain swath of people. It's not affordable enough. It's not deeply affordable enough. AMI doesn't correspond to how much people make in, for instance, Central Harlem or Chinatown. We need to totally redesign the system, and we shouldn't be building any more luxury housing at a time when we don't need it and it's just sitting on the market warehousing. I think we need to approach zoning from a more community-based process, vis-a-vis like the Chinatown Working Group as opposed to Soho.
Thank you, Ms. Boylan. Next, I'd like to throw the question to Senator Hoyleman. How would you approach land use and building more badly needed affordable housing in Manhattan?
Well, on land use, I really empower the community boards. I believe that we need pre-certification of projects at community boards. It's been done successfully in boards in my Senate district, like Community Board 4. I want to reform community boards. Paid lobbyists are allowed to serve on community boards, as well as staff of elected officials. We need to get rid of them and make sure that the people in the community are represented on community boards. I want every community board to initiate a 197A community rezoning in the first 100 days of my office. I want to create what I'm calling a Manhattan Tenants Union. It's a great place where tenants can organize in the borough president's office, public housing tenants and tenants who have private landlords, many of whom have the same landlord they don't know. They're going to have to organize in order to renegotiate their leases once we get out of COVID. And then, we have a lot of space in Manhattan that we don't recognize, like the World Trade Center site, for example, where we could build affordable on that location. We should be investing in social housing, not letting the market dictate. You know, they say the market has no morals, and it has no morals in our housing problems. So I would focus on social housing on state and city-owned property.
Thank you, Senator Hoyleman. And finally, Councilmember Levine, 1 minute. How would you address land use and the city's affordability crisis?
Well, Rebecca, there are families all over Manhattan who are desperate to find an affordable apartment. And so for them, we have to dramatically increase the pace of production of new affordable housing using every tool at our disposal, whether it's politically popular or not. We have to protect the integrity of neighborhoods and the livability of neighborhoods at the same time. And this is the balance that I am achieving in my district, where I created the Morningside Heights Historic District, protecting 115 buildings in perpetuity, where I have created 200 new units of supportive housing by knocking down parking garages on 108th Street against intense opposition. That project is incredible and it's about to open. And now we've put forward a rezoning plan for Morningside Heights, which would add density on the avenues and trigger a requirement for affordable housing, none of which we're currently getting in the neighborhood, but would also add height protections, mid-block of 75 feet and on the avenues of 160 feet, while adding more density at transit hubs. This is the kind of balanced model that we need, that secures affordable housing, that ensures that Manhattan grows, but protects neighborhoods for everybody.
Thank you, Councilmember Levine. Very quickly, very quickly before we move on, strictly yes or no, the current comprehensive land use plan proposal in the City Council, yes or no, do you support it? Same order, Ms. Caputo, yes or no?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question?
The comprehensive city planning proposal currently that has been proposed in the City Council.
I support it with modifications.
Councilmember Kallos.
Yes, and we need to amend it to reflect feedback from the community.
Ms. Boylan.
No, I do not support it.
Senator Hoyleman.
No, community-based planning all the way.
And Councilmember Levine.
Comprehensive planning is important for equity, but I do have questions about the role of community input in this plan.
Thank you all. Wish we had more time to chat about land use and affordability, but we have to move on. We are running a little bit over time, so I don't believe we'll have any time for follow-up questions for this last question, unfortunately, but we do want to get in one last question. And I'd like to ask about Manhattan's cityscape, which we've seen change very much even before COVID. We've seen far more bike lanes get introduced, bus lanes, busways. And since COVID, open streets, outdoor dining, what would you as borough president do to keep Manhattan streets both safe, and will you continue to push for these kinds of shared streets for pedestrians and alternative transportation besides cars, keeping in mind that parking spaces are a big issue for a lot of Manhattanites and for a lot of local businesses. So there's obviously a balance there as well. First, going to throw this out to Senator Hoyleman, Manhattan streetscapes.
Well, we need to move to car-free Manhattan. It should be something like, free college tuition, universal health care, that it's a goal. But I will say that open dining and open streets has been a success, but I do hear from my neighbors a lot about the noise. Those folks who live in the village, very tightly congested streets. We need more community input. We need to review that and rethink that once we're out of the pandemic. I'm proud that we've been able to give these restaurants a lifeline, but there's time for a reassessment, certainly. That said, I'm looking forward to congestion pricing. I have fought for that my entire public career. I'm looking forward to building more protected bike lanes. I'm looking forward to New York City taking over our mass transit system and making sure we get the revenue. We could be taxing apartments that are second homes for billionaires worth $5 million or more. That would give us $300 to $400 million a year that we could put into mass transit, into other transit goals. Certainly, there's a lot of work to do, but the Borough President's Office is the perfect hub for this discussion around alternative transportations, making certain that we have a city that's safe for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists alike.
Thank you, Senator Hoyleman. Ms. Boylan, how would you address the city's streetscape?
I mean, the reality is at this point, it already is extremely unequal. 70% of our public realm is streets taken over by cars. And that means the limitations of how we can use it safely are greatly reduced. And I think some of the best innovations we've had are with outdoor dining and with supported and protected bike lanes. We need to move more in that direction. I implemented the Broadway Boulevard transformation for major parts of it near Harold and Greeley. If we have safer streets that perform traffic calming, that have people on the streets, we have cyclists that are supported and separated, we'll have safer streets for everyone, pedestrians included. And we need to invest in that to make it work for everyone. That's a huge portion of the capital budget that I will be using each year, is to connect these spaces, do traffic calming, prepare for the permanency of these outdoor venues, and make them all work together so that we can respond to the needs and the desires of community members and also make our streets safer and more pedestrian friendly.
Thank you, Ms. Boylan. Councilmember Levine, Manhattan's changing streetscapes. How would you continue to change them? How would you keep them safe? What would you do?
Look, I'm fighting for a renaissance in public space, and that starts with the streets. Safety first, and the way you achieve safety on crowded streets is by separating out cars from buses, from bicycles, from pedestrians. And so you need a comprehensive network of dedicated bus lanes. You need a comprehensive network of protected bike lanes. But there are other great policy objectives that we can achieve by creative use of streets, including recreational space, including solving the problem of mountains of trash bags by creating containerized trash receptacles curbside, including by solving the mounting problem of congestion due to internet deliveries by creating specialized locations curbside for electric and human-powered delivery vehicles, a plan I've put forward that would ease congestion and improve the environment and safety. And my vision of a renaissance in public space extends beyond streets to include parks, which I want to double down on investment of, and even rooftops. I want to see a dramatic expansion in green roofs to cool the heat island effect, to absorb rainwater. We can do these things if we push creatively on public space, and this is what I'll do as borough president.
Thank you, Councilmember Levine. Councilmember Kallos, same question, 1 minute.
I don't own a car, unlike 80% of New Yorkers. If I'm getting anywhere, it's by public transit. It's one of the reasons that we opened the Second Avenue subway. And I did that with Congressmember Carol Maloney, who endorsed me for borough president. When buses never showed up in the neighborhood, I used my background in tech to prove that we weren't getting services. We've been able to use that to win select bus service and off-board payment, which has actually sped buses along on 79th and 86th, and along as the M15. I'd like to get that for every crosstown route. We also were able to win new buses for Manhattan that are more reliable. They even have Wi-Fi and USB charging. We were able to add ferry service for the east side, and we'll be adding ferry service to the west side this summer. The New York Times endorsed me in 2013 for my fresh ideas, mentioning my support for congestion pricing. I've got an even stronger proposal that would go from 700,000 vehicles in the central business district to tolling all 4 million vehicles entering New York City. That would get 1 in 4 cars off the roads like Thanos in the Avengers. You can see more of my ideas at kalos.nyc/ideas. There's a lot there.
Thank you, Councilmember Kallos. I appreciate the reference. I'm a big nerd, so appreciate the reference. And anyone who hasn't seen our City and State cover when we photoshopped the governor to look like Thanos, I recommend looking up. And finally, I'd like to throw it to Ms. Caputo. Same question, 1 minute, Manhattan streetscapes.
Sure, thanks. I've devoted my life to transportation policy as a municipal infrastructure finance executive, and now at the World Economic Forum, where I run our work on transportation in cities around the world. Look, public transit and safe, walkable streets are the cornerstone of a thriving metropolis. During my job at the community board, I implemented 3 bike lanes: Columbus, Amsterdam, and Central Park West. We got it done by working with people who agreed with us and some people who didn't agree with us. I pushed for a car-free Central Park and got it done after many, many years. We restructured intersections for safety countless times after listening to the community. And again, bringing this back to what the community board does and what the borough president needs to do, that is the responsibility of a borough president, to really bring neighborhoods and people together. So whether it's the transportation alternatives or block associations who care about safety, that needs to be paramount. I've already mentioned congestion pricing, and I just want to add again, Manhattan needs to be safe, accessible, green, and attractive. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Caputo. Because we did run over and some of our other questions, and unfortunately, we don't have time for any follow-ups. And unfortunately, that is the end of our question section. Obviously, we did a lot of stuff we did not get a chance to touch on: homelessness, the environment, policing. Unfortunately, which I'm sure you all have a lot to say, and that I encourage anyone tuning in to look up your platforms for anything that we haven't talked about. Unfortunately, we are time limited by the hour. With the remaining time that we have, I'd like to give each of you 1 minute to share with us why New Yorkers should get your vote, and anything else you'd like to add from today's discussion, or, as I just pointed out, haven't had an opportunity to talk about yet. And we're going to start with Ms. Boylan. 1 minute for your closing statement.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm Lindsay Boylan, a career urban planner, progressive Democrat, job creation expert, public space manager, and mom of a 7-year-old daughter. I came to New York with $100 in my pocket, and I'm doing exactly what I love, which is try to problem solve and figure out solutions moving forward that center people who have the most challenges, people with mobility issues, people who've been left out, systemic racism, and responding to these issues. This would be the great honor of my life, and I know I'm the right person to do this job. So please get on board and rank me #1. Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you, Ms. Boylan. Councilmember Levine, 1 minute closing statement.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, City and State. Thank you, 92nd Street Y, and thanks to my colleagues for this great discussion. I am so proud of the Diverse and Broad Coalition that is building my grassroots campaign with endorsements from many elected officials like Congressmember Adriano Espaillat, former Congressmember Charles Rangel, Congressmember Nydia Velazquez, from powerhouse labor unions like DC 37, 32BJ, Hotel Trades Council, Transport Workers Union, the nurses, theatrical Teamsters, and many others. And some of the city's most important advocacy groups have endorsed me, like the New York League of Conservation Voters, Planned Parenthood, Streetscape, Voters for Animal Rights. Y como algunos de ustedes ya lo saben, no importa el idioma que usted hable ni donde haya nacido, seguiré luchando por usted, al igual que he hecho durante toda mi carrera. Ese es mi compromiso. If you've liked what you've heard from me tonight, if you believe in our vision, then I invite you to join this large and diverse coalition. Check us out at votemarklevine.com, and please rank me #1 for Manhattan Borough President. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Levine. Senator Hoyleman, closing statement, 1 minute.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm up in Albany. That accounts for the decor behind me. I'm fighting for a bill right now called the Adult Survivors Act, which is going to allow the adult survivors of sexual abuse to file claims against their abusers or the institutions that may have protected them. I think that shows an example, gives an example of the type of public official I am. I take on fights, know me by my enemies, including the anti-vaxxers who battled me and continue to threaten me and my family because of my work on vaccines. Big tobacco, because I took on the e-cigarette industry by banning flavored tobacco. The NRA, just yesterday, I passed my bill to ban ghost guns and hold gun manufacturers liable. But I'm going to be fighting for more as borough president, including lowering speed limits in Manhattan. You know, Albany sets that for us right now. That shouldn't be the case. Manhattan needs to do it. I'm going to be fighting for tenants and seniors and our public school kids and our arts workers. I'm a fighter. I'm a progressive champion, and I hope I'll have your vote. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator Hoyleman. Ms. Caputo, closing statement, 1 minute.
Thanks to everyone for today. Look, now more than ever, our city and our borough need qualified new leadership to move Manhattan forward. When you talk about decor, I actually wanted to do this today from the backdrop of my local dry cleaner that's had an 80% drop in revenue over the last year as a result of the pandemic. This job is really about neighborhoods, and it's going to require executive leadership and a leader with a track record of building bridges in our neighborhoods to get things done. I believe that the way to move Manhattan forward is by working together. I'm a bridge builder. I have 25 years of living and working here. I have bridged the public and private, global and local, and neighborhood to neighborhood, infrastructure finance, chairing Manhattan Community Board 7, and running a grassroots civic organization. Community, inclusivity, and equity at the heart of everything I do. And I'm looking forward to representing you as your next borough president. I hope you'll join us at elizabethcaputo.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Caputo. And finally, Councilmember Kallos, take us out. Closing statement, 1 minute.
Thank you to City and State and 92Y for hosting. I'll see many of the viewers at the May Center pool, teaching my daughter to swim, or at Shababa with my daughter and those great stuffed animals. I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because anywhere else in America, people are struggling to get out, but here we're struggling to stay. And I believe we can fix that. Growing up with a single mom sharing a 1-bedroom as a public school student, reduced lunch, I know we can end youth hunger. As a lifelong tenant, I'm tired of real estate developers getting whatever they want from politicians who take their money. This year, we can elect a city council and a borough president who haven't been corrupted by real estate money. Together, I believe we can win a Manhattan where no student goes hungry, where nobody gets forced out of their homes, and free of anti-Semitism. I'm proud to have the endorsements of Congressmember Carol Maloney, nearly 80 labor unions from nurses to construction workers to bus drivers. And I hope to have your support as well. Join our team at kallos.nyc to fight for a city where no one has to struggle to stay. We can win a Manhattan for all of us.
Thank you, Councilmember Kallos, and thank you to all of the candidates who joined us today. This concludes our Manhattan Borough President's Candidates Forum. Thank you so much again to everyone who participated and answered questions today. I wish you all the best of luck and hope that the voters watching today found the conversation informative and useful. With that, I will turn it over to 92nd Street Y CEO Seth Pinsky to close out our event.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. This marks the conclusion of our Manhattan Borough President Election Forum. There remains, of course, so much more ground to cover. However, we greatly appreciate the time that all of the candidates provided to us and the opportunity that they gave us to understand their many positions and proposals on the key issues facing Manhattan and the city. Thank you to all of the candidates for joining us and for sharing their time so close to the June 22nd primary. And thank you to our amazing moderator, to you, Rebecca, and our media partner, City and State, New York. And thank you to all of you, our 92nd Street Y patrons, for supporting the Race to City Hall series. To join us for our upcoming Race to City Hall events and other 92nd Street Y programs, including our upcoming mayoral forum to be held on Monday, June 7th at 7 p.m., both online and in person with an in-person audience at the 92nd Street Y's Countbin Concert Hall, please visit our website, 92y.org. We hope you enjoyed the program and thank you for your participation.